speak. Don't worry about it.
I'll try not to sneeze every 5 seconds again.
So yesterday, she's at this meeting, and everybody was just turning to her. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you.
Finally, the mayor of Pineville asks if I'm allergic to him.
Yeah. Guy that way.
If you go into the email, you should have presentations.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started with today's work session of the Waxhaw Board of Commissioners, March 26, 2019. We have three items to discuss in a work session environment: small transportation projects, Facade Grant, and continued discussion of the Downtown Redevelopment Process. And so without further ado, we'll turn over to the small transportation projects first. Greg, do you want to kick it off, or is Matt?
This is a follow-up to a couple of discussions that have happened, and specifically to talk about kind of the formalization of a project list. Matt shared with you a while back some of the ideas that engineering department had put together for possible candidates on that list, and asked the board to think about additional projects, the validity of those projects, and get that project list into a working list that could be focused on. Two of the projects Matt's going to talk about, we've already made some headway on to try to get those initiated with the start of the vehicle fee that was implemented July 1st. So the intent there being to go ahead out of the gate, have some project that was advancing. A number of these projects are 18, 24, 36 months in length. A number of the projects are in the $150,000 to $300,000 range. So these are all projects that are designed to increase mobility in town, address congestion in town, and they come specifically from the statute that allows the levy of the fee. And that provides for financing, constructing, for maintaining, repairing, constructing, reconstructing, widening, improving public streets in the city or town. So that's the underlying legal basis for it. Matt's going to discuss a few of that, just kind of give you a list, and it was sent out, some of the earlier projects that were discussed, but really the intent today is hear from the board as to what projects you want to see on that list moving forward. This is not a decision, but this is a discussion of what that list might look like going forward.
Okay, Matt.
So yeah, I guess we'll start with where we were at with Kensington Drive to the turn lane for Morehouse Road. In July, when we last discussed it, it was kind of prioritized as the one we thought we could take down the quickest, because it's currently kind of being negotiated with the developer for Lindsay Meadows. We can take that project down in cooperation with them, all in the same time frame that they're doing work for their own development. And so we saved not only the funds in terms of mobilization, but also the disruption to the area will only happen one time instead of them doing it and then we come back. And I think it's a win-win in that respect.
Just clarity, takedown means construction.
Right.
Okay.
Sure.
I just want to make sure.
Right.
Because these things are long, can be long. That's
They absolutely can.
All.
I think, again, another reason we chose this one was because we have control of the street right of way. We're not having to negotiate with DOT and get approvals per se, or real severe amounts of right of way, which always slow things down. There's no federal guidelines to have to come through, and so this one was pretty easy to kind of put it at the top of the list for something to really give some good bang for the buck.
Just a question, please. This was a couple months ago that we talked about this. What is it that you have, as a tool to control when that work would start?
Basically, when the subdivision is approved, there will be an agreement in place to govern all the guidelines. Money, if it has to change hands, that'll have to be detailed very specifically. The construction, who's responsible for what, and that all has to be laid out very clearly so that at any given time, there are no surprises or no gray areas that lead to confusion and complications.
So you're able to do this now. Some of the older projects didn't have that much control in place, perhaps, as you're putting in place now?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to engage in anything of this nature without it being clear, and I don't think Charlie would let us, hopefully, make any missteps in that direction. This is not a handshake deal by any means. Right now it's kind of more nebulous because they have yet to have plans approved and they're still kind of finalizing all the fine points. But my understanding right up to this minute is their approval is pending these kinds of decisions, and as soon as they do get that approval, they're going to proceed with construction. So we're looking imminent this spring to break ground
Right.
for their project, and as a matter of course, this turn lane.
You'll actually have a formal agreement in place as
Oh,
to
yeah, most
who
definitely.
does what, when, and how much.
Yeah,
and
no,
so-
it has to be. It'll have to be spec'd out and everybody clear so that there can be no question who's responsible should something come up.
So I know where Morehouse is Lindsay Meadow impacted by the Waxhaw Marvin Kensington intersection? Are you trying to tie those two things together, or?
Well, they've been coordinated closely in terms of additional right-of-way that needed to be gained, where those ultimate signal pole locations had to be. So that legwork, there has been at least that degree of
Okay.
communication and coordination. As far as the actual construction, it's too early to tell on both sides, really, if anybody's going to be stepping on anybody's toes out there at this time. But certainly, once pre-construction conferences are kind of initiated, those kinds of issues can be kind of brought up.
But they're close in timing.
They
Could be.
conceivably could be,
Yeah,
yeah.
could be. Yeah, sure.
Do we have a sense of what the positive impact would be for town by doing this project as a priority?
Yeah, I mean, basically from a safety standpoint and a flow across that intersection, you're going to eliminate the issues you'll have if a car is stopped there now trying to turn in. They are going to stop the through lane traffic, and you're going to have to wait and create not only a safety issue. If someone's not paying attention coming out of that intersection, they want to barrel through and they don't see somebody stopped. And then you've got the queuing that it provides where you can have several cars waiting to make that, and still through traffic is able to come through.
How much queuing are you expecting?
I think they're showing maybe 75 feet.
Which is
Three
three
cars.
cars?
3 cars,
Okay.
right. And probably for that size of a subdivision, that's probably appropriate. And really, it's just what was available between the storage at the light itself and this intersection. It was really the best that we could get.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and the real challenge there, because I drive that every day, you can see the ramifications of no turn lane right now with the heavy traffic coming up Kensington from
Right,
South
and
Carolina.
It just takes that one, and
Yeah.
everything's got to stop. So I think this is really fallen into our laps quite well, considering normally none of these things line up in any of these ways. So hopefully it'll go in, and we'll all be well pleased and can move on to the next one.
So given there's many players, what's our share on this, roughly?
I-
Percentage-wise, you don't have to give me a dollar amount.
Yeah, I think it's coming out pretty well. They were to get me an estimate today, and that had not come in, but I would expect well below what the annual funds that we have available from this year's fee. So we should have, plenty of room for contingencies and a comfort level, at least talking at it at this point, and then some funds to roll over.
Very good. Other questions?
So then, there's a long list, and there's no real rhyme or reason to how they are listed, but they are all projects I think we can all agree have value certainly have their own degree of kind of comparison and pros cons. Howie Mine sidewalk was one that was brought up as well at the initial stages, because this was one that we tried to get a block grant for, and we just couldn't meet the reporting criteria for the census. And so even though I think we were keen to have this in place, we do have the ability, I think, with these funds to go ahead and maybe bring this to the forefront again.
Can I ask, I thought we couldn't spend STP funds on state roads.
You spend Powell bill on
We're confusing pots here, because I'm thinking of this as
Right,
STP
and then I think that's
money.
an underlying theme is these are all projects that one way or the other, whether we are starting with maybe seed money to initiate these things, might have cooperation with NCDOT at any level. Anywhere we can find to make this work is going to kind of be in the background.
So this isn't necessarily an
Right.
STP discussion, this is a road projects discussion.
It is, in a sense, to kind of just get the juices flowing, just
Okay.
kind of get us. I need to understand really where you're coming from, and this is kind of setting the basis for where we're coming from. And then in the background, there's always going to be, we're going to have to vet these things individually
Okay.
as we kind of rise and
Right.
fall these prioritizations. And it helps, some of these are going to have to occur over several years because of the sheer scale. If we were to try and think of them in terms of just paying for them in the STP kind of constraints.
Okay.
But being that the Powell bill's out there, there are grants, all these things can come into play that help kind of come together to create a project in its whole that we can then bring forward.
So just a point of clarification, while the STP program is new and the vehicle fee is new as a new funding source, the Powell bill monies exist and can be spent on town streets, state roads. As Matt mentioned, there are developer funds that we have currently access to that are associated with the Waxhaw Marvin corridor that can be spent. There are potential for future CDBG, just like the CDBG sidewalk project that's already out there. So the intent is to come up with a project list, and then staff would come back with a funding mechanism to get those. And it might mean that in any year that you would utilize the vehicle fee funding source to pave your local streets and then use the Powell bill to work on state roads. So they're somewhat interchangeable, and that's not intended to be confusing. It's intended to give flexibility.
So if we had this list 2 years ago or 1 year ago, this would have been on the list. We would have pursued the CDBG grant like we did, and then we couldn't fulfill it because lack of participation. But that's kind of what you're talking about. Staff would come back, hey, here's an approach, boom, kind of thing.
Yes, so for instance, if Howie Mine was a project in a certain year, you absolutely could spend Powell bill money on that and spend the vehicle fee money to finish that year's paving list. So it's simply, the funding gets moved around to the projects that are eligible.
Absolutely, and creatively, we'll apply anything we can, and then that's Lisa's job to vet it and make sure we're doing it all legally. But yeah, to be clear, we're going to come at it in any way. Once we set the priorities, we will knock them down.
Okay.
So again, I think the third one that we did bring up previously was the Pine Oak and Waxhaw Marvin Road intersection realignment. That one had merit because it is a current safety issue, and it's a small enough scope that it may be able to be brought down in just within the funds that we do have currently within these years that we're getting them. We're still waiting back to hear from DOT to see if this meets the threshold when they do their crash analyses of falling under spot safety. Again, we can help rise those projects up on their prioritization with our own kind of funding if that is an option. So again, we're pursuing any ability to partner. Certainly, they're both their roads, but again, where they fall out in their own hierarchy is where we'll start.
Do we have statistics on accidents there, or even on how we mind pedestrian type of, have there been any incidents?
Not so much, I think, internal to the town. It's those are questions that really have to go to DOT, and then it's just a matter of following up and when they get those results. And as yet, I haven't put the question to Howie Mine, but to Pine Oak I have, and I'm still waiting that response.
So I do know, as a matter of policy, our police department and the county sheriff record the crash statistics when they file out the incident report. So that has become far more accurate, and that was a request coming down from CRTPO, because bad data makes bad decisions.
And I've directed our GIS to go ahead and start collecting that data and having it on the web so that it's there at any given time, and hopefully in the near future we'll be able to just pull this up and go right to it.
So, curiosity question, and forgive me, I can't remember, but when you did the Waxhaw Marvin corridor study, did you look at it from a future state as Millbridge fills out and you got two entrances onto Waxhaw Marvin coming north, if you will, that are south of Pine Oak, that will add traffic to that?
Yeah, I mean, the projections are all grown in order to apply that, I think.
Because that's where the impact's going to come from.
Right.
Because up until now there hasn't been
Sure.
as many
Now,
coming out.
they don't necessarily project crashes in that way,
Right.
but they do the trip volumes, right? And so it was included in that report that this intersection be realigned, and it helps give us, if we were to say, if we thought it was of any value to bring it to the CRTPO, we'd already have that data
Right.
ready to submit, but it's probably pretty far down on that list of projects that would kind of go to the prioritization.
Would the right turn only on 16, as the 16 design, have a future impact on this? So
Yeah, I think we'll see that people will change their behaviors
yeah.
if they find it unacceptable to manage how it's constructed. And that's, people do that now, and whether or not it actually pays off, it's kind of a perception thing, of preference. And so again, we have NC 75 and Old Providence Road. That's right in front of the gas station, coming into the east side of town. It's right now they've realigned it so it's better than it was, but it would perform better as a roundabout. DOT doesn't necessarily have it on their radar. I know the county has it folded into their critical intersection planning to kind of promote toward getting funding of that nature, but it certainly is something. I know when we're talking about early morning traffic and the school being in that side of town, this would certainly benefit. Right now, I think we have an officer that goes out there generously to help move that along at the particular time of day that it's the worst. And again, because it's not a stoplight, this is reasonable. There's certainly some grade issues, and right-of-way are going to be impacted, but I think at first flush, this looks like a promising option. And this is one that's kind of been at a concept for a long time, is turning left north onto 16 from 75 if you're coming in from the west. They did add the protected left at the signal, but only that if the cars aren't already able to get out of the way, then you're waiting on that guy as the through movement is stuck. This is going to impact parking there, and I think that's why it's been maybe hard to promote, but I think we're at a point where we need to consider these things and at least have it fall into place priority-wise when we think it's worthwhile to have that conversation.
So when are they going to do the redo of 75 down there?
I've not heard anything.
I thought, didn't we hear it was like 2 years out they were going to kind of redo the road and fix? That's why they didn't want to spend a lot of time on the pothole.
supposed to resurface the downtown area, I think was the reasoning that they had for a while, not
Yeah.
using potholes.
I'm just wondering if that is something that they're looking at, is it time, do we address this with that kind of thing and tie them together?
You're talking about going, like you're heading east and making a left to Providence across the track.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there room to put a left turn?
You'd lose the parking on the right-hand side.
Yeah, and so aligning those lanes up right, all of that has yet to be done. I know when I ran into Scott Cole at the first NC-16 widening meeting, he had mentioned that he was originally a district engineer here, and that was a plan that was promoted. And so I asked him, I was like, hey, do you have anything on paper we can start from, or is that just a concept just recently to follow up on that? And I haven't got a response yet, but that certainly, at least in his mind, has already been kind of considered. Okay, Bonds Grove Church Road and NC-16. This one, again, we tried to get on the spot safety like we did with Gray Byram. The initial response at the time was that the widening was going to come and they would just kind of let that take its course. Since then, they've pushed that widening back a year, and so that only brings this kind of more in the forefront of, is that something we want to go ahead and take down because it's an issue we know we're having, and it's only going to get worse until 2024. Again, it's a valuable project. The timing is certainly an issue. Is that amount of effort and money we want to spend, knowing that it's coming, or is it worth it in the short range, and just purely, something for the board to consider?
Not that I would anticipate a favorable answer, but is this something that we need to ask Marvin, since it hovers on the border? Do they want to participate in this at all?
Right. No, I'm open to collaboration, absolutely.
Okay.
This is one that is outside of town limits, but I think anyone who has to make the commute from Waxhaw is certainly frustrated with, and that's at Ennis Road when you're coming south and you get the traffic that's got to turn off of 16 onto Ennis. It just creates a backup that is unmanageable at times. And I think the initial response from DOT has been that, well, it requires water line relocations, utility relocations that make this project larger than it really sounds like. But in my opinion, if you're coming through in 2024 to widen that, then can we just let the utilities ride? Again, there's no sense in me trying to have this argument if the town's not interested in trying to promote moving this ahead. Again, that would be something we would want to coordinate with the county and or the localities. But I think if we're talking about what kind of real impact can we have with a limited amount of money, this is a spot that everybody will feel better if they can just move around those turns and continue on into town. So then we start moving off of 16 and 75 and back to Waxhaw Marvin Road. Same issues that were brought up in the corridor study. Bonds Grove Church Road and Waxhaw Marvin Road are due to have some sort of improvement, a realignment, a stoplight, things like that. And so this falls right. It's kind of comparable to any of the other ones in terms of the need and the ability for us to maybe help speed it up. Again, just moving south, Gray Byram Road and Waxhaw Marvin Road. The volume is maybe a little different, but I think the impacts, and it's more in town. Anywhere we can kind of make these improvements that we know are going to happen, I think everybody benefits.
What are you thinking there?
In terms of
Because there's a going outbound there or north, there's the right turn lane. They put turn lanes on Gray Byram. Are you thinking turn lane coming
Yeah,
back into town? Is that what?
The report recommended additional turn lanes and a signal.
Okay.
Again, this is just the kind of disclaimer. These are all have their varying costs, risks, pros and cons, and all of that really can be detailed more clearly to help decision making going forward. We just kind of are starting off, kind of getting the concepts out there.
Can I just say, since you're seeking sort of a feel for what we prioritize, just as a macro level, when I see a sidewalk replacement and upgrade listed, personally, I'd like to see sidewalks added where they don't exist before, where we don't provide any sidewalk before we take a sidewalk that exists but maybe isn't as good as we'd like. I'd like to see the people who have no sidewalk provided for first.
Sure. And I think it's kind of interesting. This discussion started kind of from purely a vehicle transportation standpoint, and I think that's the lens we've been discussing it through. As we start to talk about kind of marrying funds from one to the other, it does provide that ability now, because that's my biggest problem I have with sidewalk is I don't have any funding to really help make a dent in the need and the prioritizations. The first thing that came to mind is those gaps are along 16, and then we're saying, well, that widening's coming. Why would we want to put sidewalk in where we know it's going to get ripped out? So that kind of takes a lot of the top priorities off. But your point is well made. There's not a shortage of need in the sidewalk side as well. And should these conversations happen kind of parallel to one another, so that we kind of get clarity for both moving forward, I could bring that forward as well. I think if I were to look directly at the priorities we set, one that makes a lot of sense is the Pine Oak Road one. Comes high on the list, and it's not 16. The interesting part about that, the north side is supposed to be built by Prescott, but the north side doesn't have any subdivisions on it. And so we've been in discussion just at a real basic level of, can we get some payment in lieu there and move that to the other side, have them maybe build it on the other side. Well, DOT doesn't have the right of way, so they're talking about having to work with every individual property owner, and there it becomes untenable at a kind of a macro level. But certainly there's an ability that the biggest thing is, what is the sidewalk going to? It can connect all those neighborhoods, but then it stops there at, an intersection that is not well served, and we're still expecting that the widening is going to come through. So maybe the timing will work out where it all makes sense, but that's all certainly something we can continue the conversation on, because this money isn't earmarked and out of limits on both sides. So we can certainly contemplate that.
Yeah, I think my first priority, and that's what we want to talk about, would be anything that has to do with public safety, and then the second would be anything that would have to do with improving traffic flow. And we don't really have a public safety measurement on any of these projects that you're aware of. Some, maybe one stands out as a really bad place. Having said that, when we go to the traffic flow problems, I would spend Waxhaw money in Waxhaw first. I know that it's tempting to try to fix Ennis, it's tempting to try to fix Bonds Grove, but to me, I always think of the priority is downtown. That is Waxhaw, okay? And the two projects that you mentioned on 75, I would put at the top of the priority list, and then work your way out from the downtown. You're right, there's a policeman that has to show up every morning at that intersection. Let's take care of that. Let's take care of the left turns. I mean, yep, they're going to resurface downtown. At some point, there may be another TAP grant that moves over to that side of the street. But that's a tough spot in the mornings.
Right.
And we take care of the downtown first. That's our magnet. That's where people come to.
Okay.
Well, I think you have two magnets, because the population going east and west on Kensington is heavier than 75. I don't disagree with the turn lane and the 75 enhancements. There's one I wanted to ask you about, and I may have this wrong, but on the Waxhaw Marvin bridge replacement, we talked about sidewalk and that we would have to pay for that. When is that coming, and do we need to add that to this list, or do we keep it on some other list or whatever? I remembered that, and I just thought I'd put it out there.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because as soon as we adopted the Waxhaw Marvin corridor study, I sent all that information over to the bridge division saying, hey, you know, here are our plans in this area, and they show sidewalk, and I'm working to get sidewalk there. Their initial response had been, well, we'll make room for it, but you guys will put it in when you finally get there. And my intent is to have it there before or when they get there, so that it's clear it should be built with the bridge itself. I have yet to get any response. He stopped returning my calls. His messages are full. So I just this week I reached out to Scott Cole to say, hey, I can't get any movement here, and I'm afraid the plans are going to move to a point where they're going to say, well, it's too late. Yeah. And I don't feel that's a great position to be put in. And so I have requested, you know, early on, we want sidewalk on one side, multi-use path on the other, and a greenway crossing underneath, in addition to a 3-lane section instead of 2. And the last time I did speak with him, he said he's going to send me out a doodle poll, and him and his consultant will come out here and we can talk about this. And then I've heard crickets since then.
It's something we may have to consider or add to as we go along.
Yeah, no, I
figure it out.
Right,
yeah.
Right. I need to get an answer so that we can plan accordingly. Right. And so I think what here we have is just the Google Earth. If there are any other locations you all wanted to look at as we continue the conversation that I might not have covered.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is the turning lane at Morehouse in Kensington is one of opportunity, because we should think about that from an opportunity standpoint and have a section of the road with multiple projects there maybe completed and future ready for a number of years there. That, did I have that right?
Right.
Yep. Okay. Now I don't have any disagreement with the 2 on 75 either as priorities. The turn lane probably, it's hard to say which is more important because they're both critical. The only thing I'd say, I agree on the money outside of Waxhaw, but as we learned yesterday, Waxhaw is the highest outbound traffic producer in South Charlotte. Everybody's leaving and then everybody's coming back, and so we have to look at the regional impact and figure that one out as well. And it just kind of would surprise me when they brought that up. I mean, you're sitting there with Ballantyne and Indian Land and Fort Mill. Waxhaw is by far and away the #1 producer of outbound traffic.
Yeah, and I don't think that can change unless we can find a way to really increase the workforce ability to stay local.
Yeah,
we're going to have to.
It's not likely to change.
Right, we're going to have to plan in that, and that's why in conversations with Bjorn as he's trying to move all of his projects forward, I still see value from an engineering standpoint. In one way or another, we might be coming across these intersections, whether they're in town or not, and if we're able to get them done, maybe in place of something that happens in Charlotte, then why not?
What does everybody else think? I mean, Fred spoke, I spoke, top 3. I don't know, what do people think?
I agree with the 75 and the roundabout area, but that you're saying that's DOT.
Well, I think most of these projects in some way are DOT, but we're aware that they're not going to be getting to them anytime soon.
And also the downtown 75 turn lane. I know that Ennis Road is kind of off, but I've lived here long enough to see quite a few rear-end collisions there. There's a lot. I would like to see the crash statistics on that.
Okay.
Right there.
Yeah.
Not that I'm you know, I think more downtown is more important, but that's a safety. When you're talking about safety issue, that's a safety issue. Also, I know we're looking at the main roads and the main intersections, which are important to keep the movement and the things, but I'm still looking at the older neighborhoods, Hillcrest, and there's a couple other that comes to mind that don't have sidewalks. And if you've ever driven through there or know people that live there, the children are walking in the streets, they're playing in the streets, they have nowhere else to go, they have no sidewalks. They walk to school, they walk to downtown. When there's events, the roads there are full. And they're in the middle of the streets because, for whatever reason, their parents aren't with them. They're 8, 9, 10 years old, stretched out across the road, walking up to the skate park, no sidewalks. That's a safety issue. And I know that these are important, but I think that's equally important to protect our kids in these older neighborhoods that have nothing but the streets.
And those areas, in my mind, are kind of really ideal for the larger side kind of redevelopment, revitalization, because it's hard for me to pick. How do you pick one block over another block?
I understand that.
And then it's not just sidewalks. It's the streets need to be widened. The storm drainage needs to be put in.
Yeah.
So they get.
I know it's a big issue,
Right.
and it's a big money issue, but I think it needs to be looked at over a period of time of how we can do it. Just maybe one section at a time, or a street. I know we did Sharon Road, the back street that leads up to the elementary school. That
Okay.
was done years ago.
Right, I think that was
really helped a lot with the kids walking to school.
right, the Safe Routes to Schools grant, right. Yeah, again, those opportunities are harder to kind of put into context for those areas when in my mind, we know the volumes and the lack of facilities along these major routes those are higher speeds. If you get hit there, your probability is not good. On the local streets, it's kind of a reduced level. You shouldn't be comfortable going any faster because of the conditions of the narrow roads and the parking on both sides of the streets, things like that. So walking in the street is not necessarily seen as an impossibility. Gets to kind of the care that's taken with the driver. But if you're talking about, NC 75 or 16, it's a different matter altogether. You can't expect anybody to walk on that pavement in any way.
And that's what happens on Pine Oak, is people walk on Pine Oak right in the street because the sides of the roads slope down in the yards, and so people have to walk on the street.
Right.
It's dangerous.
Where there's children.
Yeah, I've been in other jurisdictions prior to living here, and one of the things I've seen done in redevelopment is you have an area like Hillcrest. Okay, what's the average home down there? 125, 150,000, or $200,000. And you're going to hear the argument from people who live in places like Quellen and Anklin Forest and stuff like that. Well, all those amenities were in the price of our house. Fine. What I've seen done that was an equitable way to do it was the jurisdiction, I don't know if it's legal in North Carolina or not, had a pot or had a fund, and when they made those improvements, they actually added value to each house. Okay? It does add value to the house. And the people who are living there don't necessarily or can't necessarily afford it at that time. If it was a $50,000 or $75,000 assessment, whatever the amount is, it's unfair to ask them for it. But what they did is the jurisdiction put the money up, put a lien on the property, and when the house sold and the value was, the value had gone up, they collected it back, or a part of it back. Otherwise, what happens is you're putting, let's say it's for $50,000 worth of improvements, you're putting $50,000 in the pocket of that homeowner rather than other places. So some sort of mechanism to recover those funds, but not out of the pocket of the current homeowner.
Well, I to say something about that. I don't agree with that at all. Those same people are paying a $25 vehicle fee that's going into doing the stuff within the town, so they're already paying, particularly if they have more than one car. And the second thing is, when they sell their house, you know, the equitable part of it is anyone within the town that sells their house want to put the money back in for the sidewalk that they get. I don't think so.
Well, at the end of the day, we don't have a mechanism to completely revitalize Hillcrest all the way over to Waxhaw Elementary. That's a very sizable project, so we'd have to look at that as a...
And there's other neighborhoods too.
No, but I mean, from one end to the other, we don't, that's a sizable work effort that...
And it's not to say you can't pick maybe a route that makes sense and kind of improve that one.
Yeah. I think
certainly that could be looked at.
I think that's what
brought
her
forward.
point was. There's a route that they walk over to Waxhaw Elementary more than anything. Tracy?
Okay, so since we're supposed to be talking about priorities, I do agree with Fred, for me as well, that the safety is number one, and it's hard for me to make a decision on any project without having those kind of statistics. And I understand the Kensington being the most teed up to complete first, but what bothers me about that is that may not be the safety issue, and if the priority is a safety issue, I'd like for us to put the money to where that would be. So is there a way to be teeing up other projects while we're working on one, so that next year when we can use the funds, that we have the one that is the highest safety issue ready to complete that one?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's kind of a necessary piece, because we know they can't be taken down in succession. There has to be time period, and so during that time we can certainly bring as much clarity to all of these options to help kind of move the conversations forward. And starting with this feedback right here, it's very easy, I think, for me to have something to take back, run with, and bring back pretty quickly some of the crash data, volumes, and really start to fill in the picture as we move forward. As
well as, you know, working on the partnerships with Marvin, the county, on some of these other projects, because as much as I understand the traffic issue on 16, I hate spending the money when we know that this is going to be widened in a couple of years, and also as well as in some of these that are in the Marvin district, right? Isn't even the ones, Bonds Grove, Waxhaw, Marvin's in Marvin,
They're
right?
on the
and then Gray Byram is right where, is that right where it splits, or you're saying Bonds Grove is?
Gray Byron's in town.
It's in town, okay. So the one that's the Bonds Grove, I mean, I have a problem spending the
Bonds
money.
Grove in 16 is a split. One side is Waxhaw, one side is Marvin. Bonds Grove in Waxhaw Marvin may be in unincorporated.
Yes,
Maybe a county.
Right.
Yeah.
And then as far, but also looking at some of these projects, I agree with Fred that, I mean, when we have at 75 in Old Providence, we have to have a officer out there directing traffic. That's obviously a problem. I can't
But
even.
that's not a safety issue. That's a congestion. So
But is it though? Because the problem is it's not safe. There's no light or there to turn left or right, so it's really not any different than, you know, Gray Byram or Bonds Grove.
So my point to you is, when you talk safety and crash data, you're talking about numbers that are going to be really hard to discern. In terms of how many crashes are more important than other crashes, relatively
But
speaking.
if there was
Let me finish.
Okay.
All of these that he brought up at the core start as congestion issues. With the lone exception, I would say Pine Oak, because of sightline. I don't know what the crash data is. That has more of a potential to be a safety issue than a congestion issue.
Well, I think if you're looking at, say, 16 in Bonds Grove, Gray Byram, they start out as congestion, but they turn you into behaviors where you're going to risk it. You say, you know what, I've been waiting here long enough, I'm just going, and let's see what happens.
But what I'm saying is it may be if Gray Byram in 16 had a police officer out there directing too, their statistics may be different than the way it is at 75, just because we have an officer out there, so you can't really compare that
Yeah.
either.
They all start as a congestion issue and a traffic issue.
Right.
That's the only thing that we have.
Well, at Old Providence, it lends itself to an officer because you're at the curve and you're slow.
Right.
And there's good visibility. I don't think the chief would want to put an officer out on 16 in the morning, certainly not in dark.
No. You should have seen the mess at at Waxhaw, Marvin, and Kensington when the light went out. Because, I mean, it was for those officers, they had 3 cars there just to have the lights flashing to draw attention. It's that. So you got safety issues,
Yeah.
sightline issues, I should say, but it's exacerbated with the congestion.
Yeah, and the solution there in those circumstances is to put a roundabout in with cones, so you don't have anybody out there. The worst thing that happens is cars hit cones or
Yeah.
because it just takes about 1,000 cones
Cones.
to do it right. What is that?
So, I mean, is the decision, though, do we want to go with Kensington because it's teed up more and ready to go, or do we want to focus more on safety because the turn lane on Kensington, I don't, it's a congestion issue, but is that a safety issue?
It can be a safety issue. So, I mean, it depends on how, with the traffic and the build up and the back up, it can turn from, just congestion to safety right there with all the cars. And there's a lot of traffic. If you come down Kensington in the afternoon or even in the morning, with that morning traffic trying to get back and forth to school, or kids trying to get to high school, or parents trying to get to the elementary school. So you're going to have that issue. So if that is something that is ripe that we can start with, we need a starting point. Right. So we can't keep just putting things off.
So, and to your point, and Greg brought this up yesterday when we were talking, what we're seeing is behavior changes as these intersections become more and more congested, and they'll do some crazy things. What I've noticed at Kensington and Waxhaw Marvin, the majority of the people are turning left now because they're changing their behavior to get into Quellen and out that way. They're not coming back, they're not coming down and waiting to turn because of the traffic this way. It's not uncommon to see things backed up, especially in the afternoon, especially if Cuthbertson's got sports going. But more importantly, there's a lot of traffic coming back from the economic hub of Indian Land, much more so, which I think has caught a lot of us by surprise how much people moved to South Carolina to work.
I would agree with starting with Kensington. That seems to make sense to me. I would agree with B, C, and D being good priority projects. I'm hesitant
Which one are B, C, and D?
Sorry.
The screen back up.
Pine Oak and Waxhaw Marvin intersection and the 2 on 75. I would be hesitant to spend town money outside of town without more data, without a sense that someone's going to partner with us or some overriding safety concern. And as someone who's been in a multi-car pileup right in front of the hospital, I understand the importance of these projects on 16, but if they cannot be done sooner rather than later, then the usable life we're getting out of those projects diminishes every year that it goes by before we do it. Right. So if those can't be done soon, I'd rather not do them until the widening happens.
One more question. Can we afford 1? Can we afford 2? Can we afford 3?
We can probably just at a very conversational level, we can afford A and B probably. C, we really have to understand the impacts to right-of-way. D, I think maybe is more of a public kind of discussion in terms of what's more important, that parking there or the turn lane. And that's something that I can't quantify, here. The rest of them, if you talk about a stoplight.
I'll make it real simple. It'll be a 50-50 split.
Right.
There will be as many people that want the parking as they do the turn lane.
Right.
How many spots are we talking? All the spots on that
No, I
section,
think
or?
initially we would maybe be talking about turning the angled parking to parallel, and then depending on how those lanes line up, maybe losing the parallel in front of the south side. Right. But I don't think I would push that forward unless I had already a plan to put those spaces somewhere else.
Right.
Because we know they have to be there. It's just,
Yeah.
are we willing to give up the comfort of having them there?
Okay, so on the I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, on the Kensington, you feel like that would be ready to go?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so so something like the Pine Oak project, how long would it be to get that ready? Because there is some right-of-way issues there too. So what time frame are we talking on that?
It's kind of hard to answer because we want to make sure the money's there at the same time as the right-of-way and, you know, DOT's ability to kind of cooperate with all of that. But I would say it's certainly easier than a lot of the other intersections and the scopes that we're talking about. So at a very simple level, I think I'd be very comfortable moving forward, and then as information comes available, being able to bring it to you sooner rather than later.
So we're looking at what you're saying right now, and we agreed to move forward with the ones on Kensington and also with the one on Pine Oak. Then the other information, you would have to go back and assess the data or quantify it for NC 75 as to what can happen with that, and then bring back that data and information.
Yeah, I think we could start working on good concepts and applying the quickest information as it comes available to those, and then start having kind of project folders on each one in a time frame that kind of parallels how quickly we have the money available, and then start making those decisions as we get to a point where, okay, it turns out this one doesn't look any good anymore. We go back to this one and keep progressing it. And all of that happens kind of somewhat naturally. We get into this kind of rhythm of just taking it along as information becomes available, funds become available. We get more understanding what DOT will and will not do, what the CRTPO is saying. All of these pieces are good, valuable parts of the conversation.
So one thing that I think would be great to bring back to the board, and it probably sooner rather than later, I believe the August timeframe they're going to do a call for new projects.
Right.
And we would want to maybe consider some of these potentially, your judgment, but are any of these ones that we want to submit for the discretionary funds? I think those start in August and get approved towards the end of the year or the first part of next year.
Right, and so, yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Some of these certainly,
I was thinking the roundabout as an example, that is one that could be.
They could be, right, and I think because Bjorn's already got it in the critical intersection, he's got a lot of the data ready kind of to go and submit on that. And what also looks good is everything we've got in the Waxhaw Marvin corridor study, because that information is ready-made for that kind of submittal and purpose-made for that.
Good. Any other discussion? Did you take enough notes?
Absolutely.
I'd like to I think the conversation and discussion is helpful. 75 certainly is a project that we can look at, both those projects, that won't be affected by 16 widening. And that is the difficulty, and what Matt said, but just to reiterate, anything that we can look at for spot safety on 16 or Waxhaw Marvin, he's following up with DOT on those, and we need to get a no before the town looks to use alternative funding. And the point was well made that there's 3 of these that have either major portions or all of the 4 quadrants that are not in town. And so that does become a difficult proposition to either convince another entity to participate or the state and another entity to participate. So it's an 18-month window pretty much. If we said today we wanted to fund a turn signal and turn lanes at Bonds Grove, well, that really gets into that construction schedule for 16, and it does become very problematic. At that point, is it worth it? And so while these are good projects, and a year ago they were good projects, the window is certainly diminishing. I think the other comments that were made about the downtown being the core are helpful as well. One opportunity we may have is to look at, as the TAP gets underway, you know, is there a way to look at that turn lane right there in the downtown at the same time and talk to DOT about the paving schedule, about any other work that they're going to do, and bring that back to the board. But we certainly heard what was said today, and I think that's helpful.
Thank you, Matt. Very good discussion. All right, next up, Facade Grant.
So there is a slide, there's a little slideshow that's coming up with this, but I'll go ahead and talk about the intent today was to bring back to the board an opportunity for discussion on the current Facade Grant program, and then if the board wished to make changes or amend that program, to do so possibly before July 1st in the next funding cycle. Over the course of the last year, several changes have occurred in the program. If you recall, previously the Historic Committee really made the funding decisions, and this year for the first time those came to the board for the town board to actually make a decision based on a recommendation. But that was based on the rules that are in place today. And so some of the discussion that occurred was around the question of do residential properties remain in the program? The current program addresses all 4 facades of a building, so an applicant can apply for front, back, left, and right. The boundaries of the program area are certainly a question I think kind of has popped up as well. An alternate question that's somewhat more budgetary is just the amount of money that should be allocated to the program each year. So what we said we would do is come back to you with really a bit of an overview, but then an opportunity for discussion to see if there needs to be any adjustment, or if the board is comfortable with the program and its current rules and its current status, then it would proceed as it has in past years. This is a map that shows all the properties that have applied and been granted over the years, and they're color coded. It shows the downtown area, and the name of the building is commonly known that has applied and received grant funds. Just some financial data. Over the years, starting in FY13, there was a program that existed, but there was no dollar figure allocated during that time period. I don't know the history of why that did not occur. You see in 14 and 15 there was not a budgeted figure there, and then in 16 it returned with $30,000 allocated and only $2,900 spent. It then went to $25,017, and most of that was allocated in FY17. So calendar year end of 16, early 17, and then in the FY17-18 there was $50,000 allocated, and I believe what happened there in part was that there was an anticipation that the mill would apply for a fairly large grant for facade on the what would be the left-hand side loading dock area. They were unable to do most of that work in the program time frame, and only $5,800 was applied toward that project. Although I think the intention was certainly to try to do something a little bit bigger in the time period. This year, $50,000 was budgeted, and there's to date $26,484 has been allocated by the board. So that just is a bit of an overview. It kind of gives a little bit of data on, is there a possibility to look at the budgeted amount? I think staff says yes, there's that opportunity, depending on what the board wants to do. Certainly if the program shrinks in size and scope, we would suggest that budget be looked at as well. Some examples of before and after, 301 North Broad Street, and you really would probably need to get a super close up to see window frames and real detail, but just these are some before after shots of some of the projects. 409 King Street, left is before, right's after. 515 King Street. This is the Mill Main before and after. Really just the bay there. 115 East North Main Street, the former fire department. 116 West North Main Street, where Mary O'Neill's currently resides. 316 West North Main Street, residential property. 508 King Street, another residential property. This is 416 West North Main Street, a church. 101 West South Main Street at the Antiques building. 424 Price Street, residential property. And we don't have a picture of the Masonic Lodge property, and there may be a couple more that we don't have slides on those. Some of the more recent grant awards that were part of this last round. But that's kind of a visual depiction of what's occurred with some of the projects over time, and we wanted to just ask for feedback and input on the program.
Comments, thoughts?
I have some. Personally, I would like to see the facade grant be only for commercial properties. Given that, I think going back to the $25,000 a year would be plenty for the applications we would get. And I'd like to see it be the street-facing facades, not necessarily all facades. Just my 2 cents.
I agree. I feel like the benefit to this would be the downtown businesses with the front facade and not the individual houses, property that's personally owned.
I'll concur with that. I think that it should be commercial, it should be downtown, it should be the front facades, unless somebody has, a corner building.
That's why I said
Yeah.
street-facing, yeah.
I have some mixed feelings on it, but I mean, obviously the majority is in favor of just commercial, so I can support that.
What are your mixed feelings?
Well, I don't have a problem including residential in, if it's a revitalization type of project, either whether or not it be historical or a mill house type of thing. Yeah.
Would it be residential in the downtown area? I mean, like the commercial buildings and things, if we're saying that for the downtown Main Street area with the front facing, are you talking like some of the residences that are down in that area?
Ones that are in the Facade Grant area that was on the map. I mean, there are some that, and I did speak with Greg a little bit about it, and maybe what I'm more interested in is, what was that one grant? More of a, what'd you say, called a CDB grant or something?
So what we had talked about is there is or has been a CDBG program for properties in the past that were low to moderate, really low income, and it was a housing stabilization and rehabilitation type grant. That is based on income, and it does require the program I know that have used and have seen in the past required the applicant to disclose some income information, and that particular program was a sliding scale grant. So if, say for instance, you had a $20,000 improvement to a house, if you stayed in the house for 10 years, the loan essentially was forgiven. If you only stayed in there 1 year, you owed 9/10 of the loan if you sold the property. So that, some variation of that program most likely exists. That particular program was administered by the COG and James Luster, and some people wanted to participate, but quite frankly, some didn't want to disclose information, or they didn't want a perception that they needed the help. So there's a little bit of sometimes it was successful, sometimes it wasn't. The key there is the area still has to qualify, and my concern would be in the downtown, the area would not qualify. On Howie Mine, it might qualify if we could get the income information, but we lost points or the ability to qualify that area because we couldn't get information this last go around for sidewalk.
Just clarify, so that project, the CDBG grant, wouldn't be part of the Facade Grant at all. It would be an entirely separate
It's a separate program.
funding source. It wouldn't be the taxpayers' money, our taxpayers directly from our budget.
It would not be local
That's
tax
what
dollars.
I'm trying to say. I'm poorly explaining myself, and that's why I don't really, I like to focus on commercial properties, because it seems, I know some people get upset that their tax money is being spent on one person's house, whereas necessarily they couldn't ask for the same thing for their house. So it can be upsetting.
So are I want to make it clear, it's the businesses downtown as far as the district, because I'm in the business district. My property is NMX. But I would never ask for a grant to fix my house.
Yeah,
I don't think that's the
business.
responsibility of any of taxpayers to maintain my home, put gutters and windows in. But if the grant's there, then of course people are going to use it and ask for it. But just the downtown business buildings there.
So just ask these two guys to come up for a minute, just so we get some clarity. If staff is going to come back with a proposed amendment to language, what we'd want to understand is kind of what the consensus is. Are we restricting it to a couple streets, or are we restricting it to residential properties currently in use as a residential property and not a residential type structure that is used for commercial? So if it's currently commercial, the question would be, is it eligible? And I think what I've heard is, I think so. Is that right?
Say, for instance, Eight Legs Gallery. It looks residential, but it's
But it's a
commercial.
business.
Yeah.
And Asbury Group next door to me, their business,
Their business.
yeah.
that would fall in it. But I wouldn't on my side because it's residential.
And do we all think that going back to 25,000 is appropriate, or do we want to stay at 50,000, just to
Well,
throw that part?
Let's make, because I think they had a point of clarity on the last one first, so.
Well, I just, to that point, or to that question about, the current use and where it falls in the boundary, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the existing facade improvement grant boundary that you see there highlighted is based on the National Register of Historic Places.
Mhm.
And but so if we move towards taking away all the residential from it, then you're left, I guess, then what is the criteria then, the overarching boundary, what's it going to be based on? Is it, do we need to relook at that altogether as far as what constitutes downtown, what constitutes, or we're going to continue to
Maybe
use
it's a customer-based business downtown.
customer?
I don't know, what do you think?
So, the National Historic District, but excluding excluding residential.
Okay.
That pretty much gives you the downtown Main Street environment, right? I mean,
Yep.
Right, that's right.
okay.
So we're saying that the historic homes that are in the downtown area that would be excluded from the grant money. Is that what?
Yes.
Unless they were used for, like,
Unless they're
being
a
used as an office
business.
or
Eight Legs or
Yeah.
Asbury. That's right.
So I'm going to ask one more just to make sure, because one of the properties was a church. So are we not looking at the for-profit or nonprofit we're just considering them commercial.
It's not business.
Do we run any risk of not offering this grant as far, if somebody were to purchase a historic property, are there any, so in the downtown codes there would be, there's no restrictions or anything regarding how a property.
The restrictions for the historic aspect of things, the code is not the same as a facade grant. The facade grant is awarding of money. So if we had no facade grant, doesn't impact any of the restrictions whatsoever that are in the existing code, correct?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, so
I guess my point is protecting historic property. I'm just,
I don't know how a facade grant protects historic property. I think it gives money, but there's no protection with it.
encourages participation in maintaining a historic look of a property, so.
And I'll cut right to the chase. It's the government's responsibility and our purpose to sit there and try to encourage people to take care of their homes. I think that's the fundamental question.
I mean, I totally get what everybody's saying. I mean, I need new windows on my house and can't afford them, and you know, it would be nice to have that help too. But so I do get where everybody's coming with that. I'm just thinking about, are there any historic homes downtown that are falling
Well, and the towns
apart?
take pretty good care of their homes.
I'm sure there are. I think both Fred and Brenda kind of alluded to it, focus on downtown with the transportation we've been talking about. If that's going to be our economic engine, do we want to devote the money to the economic engine to try to spur it along, bring it along, try to accelerate things? And I think that's the underlying theme that I hear. You've done a great job, the staff's done a great job of the Great Main Street Award. Okay, how do we win it 2019, 2020? Let's focus in on the economic development side of it, the commercial side of it, to improve, continue to make downtown even more of a destination.
Just one caution. 8 Legs is easy. The Asbury property's easy. Those two buildings are used exclusively for business. They're not domiciles. But if somebody goes and buys a house and we're using the downstairs for whatever, or we're using 2 rooms of it, we probably need to establish some kind of criteria that distinguishes.
That's what they're trying to clarify, right?
I think the nonprofit versus commercial status was another open question we're trying to get some clarity on as well.
Could you then,
There's the
in a
Masonic-
situation like that, could you say commercial properties not being used as a residence?
Yeah,
Because
I
then
mean,
if you're
we have to
declaring it your
define-
residence and your business,
I can see somebody just opening up something in their front room of a 3,000 square foot house and then asking for a facade
yeah.
grant.
But then if they've also using it as a residence as well, then we could say that rules it out.
So this is like excluding the Masonic Lodge and the churches. Is that,
I think that's the question is,
is that what everybody's saying?
Quite frankly, I'm not worried about a nonprofit. A nonprofit is a business. The church is a business. I mean, and they are part of our fabric.
Is the Women's Club nonprofit? That's the Belk building. That's a pretty significant building.
Well, given that, I would be okay with including nonprofit entities. Because it's still not a residence.
Right. I mean, the churches on Main Street are worth.
Part of the attraction.
Yeah, that's right. Worth putting some money into if they ask for it.
I'd be fine with that.
Consensus? Yeah, okay.
so let me offer that staff will work on the issue and bring it back. And if we identify any issues that we haven't discussed, we'll bring those back to you for information. And there may be some, because this is a fluid discussion on a program that's in existence and has been available for residential. But we had heard some questions and concerns, so we thought this would be the right time to do it before we get through the budget process. And July 1st, the board would likely start seeing applications come in. And so,
And I think to Commissioner Lee's point, if you look at what we spent, we've had trouble getting to 25,000. It may not be a bad thing to start there and gee, bring back the problem to us, Kurt, and
Give it a year, see how it goes.
Yeah, and I think in the beginning, when it started in 2013, that's when it was, no one applied. And the next 2 years, it was not budgeted because no one applied the last time.
Yeah, no one
The first
applied.
year. So the fourth year is when it kind of came, and I think in that year, it was more of a facade, the front facade of the house, and then now it's gradually gone with the guidelines as far as you can do all four, you can put gutters on your house, you can put windows, and it's,
The one,
that's why we've got 29,000 this year, or 26.
Dream Chasers was the one that jump-started the commercial side of it with the firehouse. And that seemingly was, I mean, given what they've done, was a good approach there. Yeah,
Just one question as a staff question is, are there other properties in the pipeline that might actually submit before the end of the fiscal year that you're aware of?
At this point, there wouldn't be enough time for them to do, especially with how wet of a season we've had thus far. I know with one of the current properties, it took them a while because it took, for painting. So as of right now, no, there's not anything in the pipeline.
any other question? You good?
We're good.
All right, very good. Next item is
Main Street.
downtown. Don't go too far, Kurt. Don't run away.
He needs coffee, I think.
Welcome back.
Thank you. We have the clicker. All right. So this is in follow-up to the March 4th work session where we discussed specifically 216 West North Main Street, the Niven Price building property, and we walked through with Jim Prosser and with the town attorney kind of what the considerations would be to go about the sale and redevelopment of this parcel in the downtown.
As a partnership.
Right.
That was the only method we discussed so far.
I believe at that time the attorney mentioned that there were two ways to go about the process. One being the essentially upset bid process, and the other being the development, downtown development statute approach. So I'm just going to give really this is just an update of what's happened in the past couple weeks. Staff has started looking at some developers, mostly in our immediate region, who have experience with similar type and scale of project. And we've been reaching out, kind of providing some informational material, largely the kind of information that was in the briefing that was provided to ULI, and started to try to plan some meetings and invite folks down to talk further about the process. And really what this is, it's been an educational process and to kind of gauge interest, as much for the developer as for us, just to kind of see, what interest is there going to potentially be in a project, what kind of questions might we need to be asking, and then also just to see from the developers, and from the developer standpoint, is this something that they would potentially be interested in talking further and more seriously about. These slides are just here for reference in case we want to go back to them. This is from last time, but I've just listed the questions. I've added to what we had in the past work session, and happy to explain, especially the sub bullets, if you need some clarity about what we mean by those. But really, just wanted to kind of put it out there.
So, one of the things we got emailed to us was the table of permitted uses for downtown. Did you need us to bring that back to you with? We're supposed to look at it, and were there any that raised some concerns? And obviously some of them, we all probably have different opinions, but wasn't clear. Do you want those back to you so you can consolidate that? Where we had concerns, as you're looking at the developer agreement, hey, this is absolutely a showstopper from my perspective, and is there any consistency? You know what I'm getting at?
Sure, and I think it's important. It's important for the board and for staff to understand what all is allowed in this zoning district, and any feedback you have about the types of uses would, I think, would certainly be helpful for us, with the understanding and that anytime you start to really be specific, the more narrow the uses that we provide, potentially the less market value the building is going to have, because you're reducing what it can be used for. You're putting kind of from the get-go. So just with that in mind, but certainly I think
that's all. I mean,
any showstoppers, as you said, would be good. Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So we should get that back to you this week or next?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good. Just wanted to clear that one up.
So just starting with some of these questions here, what are our goals fundamentally? And within that, I threw out some suggestions, but also the last bullet there says other, because I don't mean to assume that I've thought of everything, but are our goals to build on the current downtown successes? So are we looking at, do we want to see more retail, restaurant, commercial? Is this a commercial driver for the downtown, that corner of the downtown? Are we looking to fill gaps?
Which corner are you talking about when you say that corner? Just the Niven Price?
The Niven Price corner, yeah. Sure. Are we looking to fill gaps, or to put businesses there that we might not already have? Is there value in that? Are we looking to use a development agreement to help us complete some infrastructure that may need to be done? Is it just purely a quality of life play? So do we need just to make sure that we have the kind of services and civic type of amenities that people may be looking for? So that's just fundamentally what are the goals with the project?
I would like to see us increase our retail and commercial options downtown.
And I gravitated towards the first one, build on our current downtown success, because you obviously are implementing a strategy that is building a destination, and the only caveat to that, and I don't know if it's included in your definition, while maintaining the historic charm of what downtown is. I wouldn't want somebody to tear Niven's Price down and then put something else up. So I know we've all talked about that, but it's not here. So I think that's kind of one of the goals.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think one thing, when I got the email about the list of uses, that pointed me toward the code, the UDO. I mean, there was a lot of effort years ago to come up with a downtown code, and the idea was it was to be a form-based code with some uses in it. And I was concerned that you might be limiting yourself if you had a business that you hadn't thought of and they want to come in, as long as the building still looks like it fits downtown and it's not an adult bookstore or something like that, we should be okay with that. Unless we want to go back as part of the UDO update and change the downtown code away from being a form-based code. And that's the only concern I had. We've done that work already.
Done the work, but when they ask the question, is there anything that gets your attention? So when I went through this, personally, I wouldn't want Niven's Price to become dry cleaning and laundry service. That's a permitted use in Main Street. We don't need personal opinion.
Right.
I wouldn't want to see a dry cleaner or a laundry service there. That's just me. Now, if you came back and said, hey, we got somebody wants to enter into a developer agreement that's going to have the most modern techno-whiz dry cleaning service and it's going to bring people downtown, then I certainly would want to listen to it. But
yeah,
there were 3 or 4 as I went through it that just kind of say, wait a minute, that's not fitting with the
right.
image.
And
I agree with you on the
yeah,
form-based code.
Right, and my point is, as you move forward with a new code and you find, and I agree with you, I don't think a dry cleaner is appropriate downtown. Do we change the code? Do we gather this information now and come back with a text amendment at the same time to limit it?
So I would just suggest that you let the market sort it out and let a developer come in and propose to you what those uses might be. And if they come in and say they've got a dry cleaner, then the board, in their discretion, would say this is not the right development partner.
So do we need to do this then, or?
No, I think it's a great exercise to go through and think about the reverse, really, of the list of uses that are available.
Right.
What are your top three? And what we're hearing, and I think staff supports the process kind of in ULIs, retail and office, because you've got a two-story building. So what is the retail and what is the office? But to the point that was made is there may be some uses on that second floor that nobody's thinking of that aren't really typical office. There may be some uses on the first floor that aren't traditional retail as we're thinking of it today.
Like small equipment, repair and rental, that's allowed. I don't know if we would want to see that.
So I think what you're saying is prioritize.
Yeah.
But also, you can prioritize the top and the bottom.
And you know, computer repair and rental might be okay on the second floor, but not on the first floor. Or the question to the development community, though, is what would you bring us? And then it's, okay, that doesn't fit into our vision, knowing that you've taken the time to look at what's currently kind of permitted. And then to Curt's point, if you start off with a list and just start striking stuff off and say we don't want to think about any of these things, it's going to be a signal that we're not going to be the best partner for the developer, versus saying, what do you see the market really wanting to put in downtown Waxhaw? And they'll be happy to share that answer with us.
Well, how you ask the question, that's exactly the way to ask it. I don't, and maybe you're not saying this, I don't see any harm in us prioritizing stuff, the top and the ones to the bottom. That's all, and just for awareness sake. Right. And if you get a developer that comes in that brings everything from the bottom, then we got to get educated, or to your point, hey, that's not a developer we want. We got to keep pushing. I mean, fair enough. Usually.
Two comments. One, I'm still not sanguine that a development agreement is the way to go on this building. So I don't want us to be solely focused on that. Two, there's a residence right there. So I think when we're considering uses, we should be asking ourselves, what would I want to live next door to or across the street from? And if the answer is, I don't want to live next to that, then maybe that's a use we shouldn't be asking somebody else to, whatever that use may be. Consider that there's a residence there and there are residents close by. I'd hate to see another situation like on the other end of the street where we have a business and the residents are always unhappy and the business is unhappy and they don't seem to get along as well as one might like, and there's issues with noise, and we should be cognizant of the residents when we look at the uses. That's it.
I don't think we're solely focusing, or I hope we're not solely focusing on the development part of it, but I think that it is an option, and one of the two options that were presented to us by the town attorney. So in doing so, it's something that we are looking at, or staff is looking at, and going to bring back the information so that we have all the information necessary to make an informed decision.
And that's great.
Are there any other options other than those two?
Other than what two? The development agreement or the, not that I understood.
Those are the two that were presented by the town attorney.
And I understand that. Are there any other options?
The options, there's options to sell property. You start to get into areas of lowering the value, putting covenants, restrictions and stuff. And I think what you're trying to do here is get us to define what we want to accomplish, right? I mean, with this, and then hey, if we came out and said, we have no goal for this building, we just want to sell it, make the most money, you might come back and say, we don't need a developer agreement. There's another option. I think you're trying to, rather than just jump to one approach, what do we want to accomplish? And then you guys can give us the recommendation as to how to accomplish that. Did I put words in your mouth that sound good?
I do sound good.
It sounded great, yeah. I guess I was I understood from the previous work session that a development agreement was what the board wanted to do. And based on the two options where you have either you basically put it up for an upset bid, you have no control over what happens to it, or you get to have control over through the one process that the attorney, I guess, laid out for us that gives us that ability.
All we're doing is pausing and saying, do we want to just throw it to the wolves and say bid, or do we want to have control over, by answering these questions, do we want to have control over that? Because then it dictates. If we all said, hey, sell it to the highest price, no covenants, that would be an approach that you wouldn't need to enter into a development agreement. That's all. You're right, we spent the majority of the time on the developer agreement.
I will admit to being confused about, is there not an option, I know you said something about it, but is there not an option to sell the property with limited restrictions?
You'd have to ask the attorney the process that one goes through to be put restrictive covenants, and then we would have to go out and, I would imagine, reappraise that and go through the process again, because you've just impacted the value.
Okay.
But
I just feel I don't understand that option.
You could still put restrictive covenants
right
on the building. That would not be related to the use of the property or anything besides just, this is the structure, you can't mess up the facade, you can't demolish it. Okay. Yeah, you wouldn't have this ability to create a project area where you can kind of make sure that the whole thing develops a certain way, that it gets done in a certain time period as well.
Okay.
Because if you just put covenants on it and then put it up for go through the upset bid process, they could purchase it and then still do nothing with it.
Correct.
I feel like I'd like more information on that, just so that I can compare all the options. That may just be me that doesn't understand it very well.
And Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, but the whole idea behind the developer agreement is to get stuff that we want in reciprocity, for lack of a better way to say it, to actually have a partnership that we get some things done based upon the appraised value of the building.
It's completely about a partnership, and it is about downtown revitalization, and the statute actually is under that area. Charlie can speak to that, but as Curt noted, with covenants and restrictions, you do two things, or you do at least two things, maybe more. You definitely affect the value because you've taken uses off the table, but you do not affirmatively create any requirements for the developer to address the facade, address any other parking improvements, create any kind of timeline for the developer to complete it. And unless you restrict the use, you have a wide open invitation to any of those. So then you really got to get serious about going through a list of things that you're going to put on as a covenant. And staff would not recommend that you do that. I'm certain the attorney wouldn't recommend you do that, and it would not be appropriate in a downtown setting. It's just, if you look across the state, the development agreement tool is the tool used, and it's used for a reason, and it's because it produces positive results. Because it is that partnership and it is that give and take, the town has to actually put money into the project under the development agreement. The developer's putting certainly dollars into it, but it is a conversation about what makes that entire project area successful. Once we've defined success and we have our criteria for what makes a successful outcome, then what is needed in the area to get to that. So it's really focused on trying to achieve that goal in a partnership.
And I think this is good educational aspect of it, so everybody understands it. You had a question?
So, to be clear, I am in favor of a developer project. I think we have a responsibility.
Let's be clear. You're interested in a partnership that has a defined agreement.
Not
okay.
Just selling it to the highest bidder. I think we have a responsibility to the citizens to make sure that the right thing goes there. I mean, I don't think anything would make citizens more upset than something going in that building that they would not be happy with, or something happening to the building. Say if somebody bought it and they went bankrupt, then what happens to that building? right?
but
I mean, Greg and I talked about this, and it could sit empty for a while. Is that what we want?
could happen under a developer agreement too. I mean, you're mixing and matching uses and partners, what we can get with the partnership.
What are the negatives that could happen if we do not have a partnership?
Well, to I think address that concern, a development agreement can have timelines and guideposts that if certain things are not accomplished by that, either the closing doesn't happen or there's some reversion clause that the town can buy it back for the price that was agreed upon. There's all sort of methods that can be structured to protect the municipality to address that concern. Upset bid, there is no.
To address what concern?
Well,
Any.
going bankrupt, which happens, absolutely. It happens to developers all the time across the state, and sometimes when they are in partnerships with municipalities. It certainly happened in 07 through 10 with developers across the state. Municipalities sometimes structured the deal where the municipality stepped in and became the developer. Sometimes the property reverted back to the town through different methods, or there was a structure set up where if a bank obtained the property, then the town had the first opportunity maybe before it went to the bank. There's all sorts of ways to structure that once the concerns are put on the table in that. And that's kind of the dialogue. This is great dialogue to kind of hear that concern of what happens if the developer can't fulfill their obligations.
Well, but bankruptcy can happen at any time. So how far do you go with that? You already said let them come in and make the recommendation on uses. I mean, and make sure it's consistent. I mean, so we certainly can do that through the developer agreement as well, which is why we're doing this exercise. I tend to agree that a partnership, everybody I've talked to, nobody has suggested just go sell it. And I bounced it off a number of people in the state. Just with what we have and what we're trying to do with the corner lot, partnership seems to be the way to go. But to what you're trying to do here, if we don't do this, you don't have a partnership because we can't tell them what we want out of it. And that's so answering these questions, we're not going to get to them tonight because we're getting towards end, but we have to answer these questions as a board. This is the tough part because it really is immaterial what kind of agreement I want if we can't define the goal, so you can tell us what's the best agreement. Does that make sense? I mean, we got to give you guidance. Yep. And I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying we have to give him guidance so he can structure what that partnership would look like and answer these questions.
I thought I was hearing other things that I interpreted that just we were wanting to sell it to the highest bidder, and I just want to make sure
I don't think anybody said that. I think what everybody was saying was trying to understand it. Because
I've never sold a building like this before, so I'm just trying to understand what all the options
I think
and
we just have a great
implications are.
responsibility to the citizens to make sure that this is done the right way,
Which is why we're going through this exercise. Ensure that we do that and follow the steps that are necessary.
Greg, I'm going to get back with you on some questions I have about the developer agreement, just so I can understand it better.
So
and I think the other thing too is, maybe Charlie can spend some time further elaborating on how those work, and they can be structured in a number of ways. So this entire conversation is great because it's putting on the table some of the complexities of, this is a small project. This is relatively small, 9,000 square feet. Redeveloping a mill or 30-something acres gets a lot more complex, but it's part of the hard work that has to be done, that you want to start putting those items on the table early versus at the end of the project, and the developer says this is brand new information.
Steve, one other source of information I think will help, because I've been on the other side of the table in a couple of these agreements, and the attorney, Charlie's a great municipal attorney, but at some point you may want to engage a commercial real estate attorney who's been down this road and seen a few things go bad or go well, and to help, you know, we've been talking about a lot of different things, but I'm sure an attorney that practices in this field will know a lot more than we do. And that would be a help to you as you pull it all together.
So to get there, do we agree that we're going to build on the current downtown successes? I just want to get through at least the first 5 questions.
Yes.
With the caveat that we include the historical aspect of it.
And that is later on down the line. So we will, maybe we don't have time tonight, but we'll need clarity as to what we mean by the historical aspect, because that's a whole spectrum of.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Filling gaps in the business mix. I think we've got that from the assignment in terms of we're going to let the developer make the recommendation. We're going to get back to Curt with our top 3, and if you have any that really cause you angst, to highlight that. With the agreement, do we want to try to, in the agreement, complete any infrastructure? Is that, and I think you really get down to it, in the next one below, the sidewalks in front of it would be the obvious one that would, let me put it out there. I would say fix the sidewalks as well. I would want to see that included in the Nivens price one, because that's you can't, I need a ladder to climb up right now.
You try to get as much done as you can
Right.
on the
That's right.
developer's dime and not ours. We don't have impact fees, but this is a way you can cover some of it.
We trade off the value, right? That's part of the agreement, part of it.
Yes, so how this would work in the real world is if we said the sidewalk needs to be addressed, then we might, from closing proceeds, turn around and give the developer $50,000 to work on sidewalks and parking, and that developer is responsible to do that as part of the agreement.
So I would definitely see sidewalk because of the way it is. Parking, though, we're separating, and we're already making improvements, correct?
Yes.
Parking mean in this context?
Well, that's going to be what the developer suggests it means. So it could mean that what we are doing is a good interim step, but it could mean that they think that that should be permanently surfaced.
Okay.
It could be that they mean parking across the street or down the street, and that gets to the next bullet. Are there other parcels that we own that should come into play?
Did you give them the information of the other parcels?
The developers?
Yeah. They've asked,
Yes.
you gave them the ULI study.
That's right.
And so they would logically bring that.
We're kind of leaving it to them to ask.
Okay.
And just to clarify, nobody has been to town yet, nobody's visited, but there are phone calls and there's interest being generated, and Curt has a link to the information that we can send once there's interest. That may mean that they look at it and they pass and have no further time to devote to it, but then it may mean they want to come start looking, and the idea is to bring forward at least a list of development partners that the town might be interested in talking to. But so you're going to hear us talking about engaging in a dialogue with developers. That means folks locally that have already expressed interest, and Curt has a number of those, and it may be in the region as well. But that we're not, no one's being excluded, but this is opening it up to a broader dialogue.
Okay, and so going down the list, what is the town prepared to contribute? Are you asking the question how much of the sale price, assuming we got the list price or the appraised price, or how much of that we're willing to contribute, or on top of?
So this is a question I think that's one to think about long term, and you think about it in the context of what you're asked to contribute and then what you're gaining out of it. So it's not an immediate upfront answer. You may have a percentage in your mind that you're comfortable with, but it really is dependent upon what the development tends to bring to the table and then what the ask is.
So, Curt, how would you suggest we come back to these questions in the next work session kind of thing? Or is there more of a sense of urgency that we need to do it sooner? This is great discussion to get the ball rolling,
Yeah,
because now we understand what you're getting at.
I think it's been especially helpful to get the clarity on that first and second main bullet there, as far as goals, and we've touched a little bit on project area. and just the need for sidewalks and such. Probably need some more information with regard to Secretary of Interior standards, historic redevelopment. I mean, are we looking to bring it back to its 1913-14? Are we flexible with that? That sort of thing will need to be, because that's going to be a question we get, because it does impact tax credit eligibility from the developer's perspective. So those kind of things I think we'll need to sort out.
Curiosity, are they making any changes to the criteria in the state historic, or are they just extending the?
It looks like they're just extending the sunset clause or proposing. Okay. Yeah. And then evaluation criteria there, that's once if we do end up developing an actual request for proposals, how we're going to actually evaluate them quantitatively.
You just correct when we develop. So we're committed to this. Okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now you're doing great work. I will tell you, I had breakfast with one of the Main Street people today, Jim Weiland, and his comment was, you really need to do a partnership. He said, and he took me through some of his past experiences of where developers say one thing and do another, and so that was very eye-opening to me to hear him share his real experiences on that. So this is good. So you'll schedule us for the next one to come back, and all of us should go back through and make sure we're clear on this.
Right, if any questions come up on that.
Be ready for it. Okay?
That works.
Makes sense. All right, with that, we will adjourn the work session, take a 15-minute break so we can get ready for the regular board meeting and hear what Commissioner Helms and Manager Watson really have to say to us. That's all. Adjourned.